3 years after the big bank bailout, secrets are emerging, including the one about the $13 billion in profits the banks made thanks to below-market loan rates from the Federal Reserve. Our fourth story on the countdown, a kind of smoking gun proving your worst fears about the 2008 public welfare checks from taxpayers to banks who described themselves as too big to fail.
But this is secret negotiations, and I don't have the records, so I'm reading between the lines that Kissinger was successful in convincing Faisal, rahimahullah. And when he convinced Faisal, Faisal realized that there's a lot of money to be made now. This is the deal. We want you to make a law that you will sell your oil for only US dollars. And Faisal fell for it. May Allah forgive him. From the time you decide that you will sell your oil for US dollars, you then went on to convince all the other Arab oil producing countries, because they looked up to Saudi Arabia, and they all quickly agreed. And OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, was then successful in establishing a rule for all member states of OPEC that we all agree that we will sell oil for only US dollars, and that was the birth of something called the petrodollar, and that is what they wanted at Bretton Woods, but Imran didn't understand it. No. That was the ultimate prize that they wanted. When they started in 1944 in Bretton Woods, but I did not understand it. And now they have established something called a cartel, like a monopoly. A monopoly means you take control of the market and you fix the price. So no competition anymore in the market. This is haram. Even in American law, this is haram. Yeah.
Who are they? Saudi Arabia, any oil producing country of the world. They sell their oil to the men who sit behind the computers in New York and London every day, and they're representatives of the World Bank and the IMF, and they're the ones that make the difference between what Saudi Arabia gets a barrel of oil out of the ground. You know how much Saudi Arabia, how much it cost them to get a barrel of oil out of the ground? It cost them $5. Who's making that between that and $70 a barrel? They sell it to the oil bourse. Their representatives sit behind the computers in New York and London. They tell everybody on the face of the earth what they're going to give them for a barrel of oil for that day. OPEC has nothing to do with it. Shell Oil Company has nothing to do with it. You don't have anything to do with it. Price and demand has nothing to do with it. It's controlled by the men who sit behind the computers in New York and London every day. They're representatives of the World Bank and the IMF, and they take the big cut right off the top before the oil company ever gets theirs, and they could forgive the loans of every third world country because you paid for it at the gas pump, and it's an atrocity. And if the world ever wakes up, they're going to overthrow the powers that be, and the people will be we the people again. Now I'll give you the details. During the administration of President Carter, there was a man by the name of Mr. Henry Kissinger. He went to every leading oil-producing country in the world, and he said, I'd like to cut you a deal. And they said, what? He said, we will send America's oil companies over to produce your fields. We'll make you rich. You'll be the wealthiest people on the face of the earth. You must sign on the dotted line to do two things. You may have heard this. Very few have. I would not had I not been there. You must do two things. Number one, you must denominate all oil sales in American dollars. Since 1960 and the inception of the great oil boom, all oil sales have been done in American dollars. Watch this carefully. You've got to know what to do when you go back to those booths over there in the exhibit room, and you'd better do it today. Number one, you must denominate all oil sales in American dollars. Number two, they said, what's that? We like the first one, solid as a dollar. You remember those days? What's number two? He said, you must take a certain percentage. I wish I knew that percentage. Somehow I missed it back in those days. He said, you must take a certain percentage of everything we buy oil from you with, and you must turn around and invest it in American T-bills and securities. Basically, in a nutshell, the oil-producing countries of the world would buy our national debt, $9 trillion. Watch out.
Let's flash back to this exchange from January 2009, when then Congressman Alan Grayson of Florida grilled Donald Cohn, then the vice chairman of the Fed. Grayson, who will join us in a moment, wanted to know what banks got what loans and for how much, and Cohn ducked the question and implied it was none of Grayson's business, nor the public's.
And you're saying that that entitles you to keep secret the expenditure of $1.2 trillion, $4,000 for every man, woman, and child in this country?
I don't think we're keeping it secret. I think we're releasing a lot of information about it, but I would personally, I would personally be very, very reluctant to release the individual names of the borrowers.
What do you think might happen if people knew how their $1.2 trillion had been spent? Do you think they might be angry?
No, I don't know, obviously. I think that they can judge how the money is spent from how the money is lent from what we're telling them.
And what if the public was told more? Senator Sherrod Brown of Ohio suggesting Congress would have been less generous. He told that Bloomberg magazine, this is an issue that can unite the Tea Party and Occupy Wall Street. There are lawmakers in both parties who would change their votes now. Joining me now, former United States Representative, current congressional candidate, Alan Grayson. Good to talk to you, sir.
Thank you.
Did this news just prove you correct from that hearing in 2009?
Yes, I'm often proved correct, Keith, but usually faster than this. It usually doesn't take this long. But I am pleased that we were able to go join with Ron Paul, who introduced legislation to accomplish just this 26 years earlier, and get a full and complete audit of the Federal Reserve, which has now shown $16 trillion in money lent out directly from the Federal Reserve to institutions, various institutions, including many foreign institutions. About a third of the money, it turns out, went to foreign institutions, and then on top of that, another $10 trillion in currency swaps between the Federal Reserve and foreign central banks, which they had no way to recover if the foreign central banks weren't able to get the money back themselves. So altogether, $26 trillion of bailouts just in those two categories, not including TARP, not including FDIC financing of U.S. institutions. $26 trillion, that's almost $100,000 for every man, woman, and child in America, all done by the Federal Reserve without any act of Congress authorizing it.
All right. There's a lot of numbers thrown around here, and sometimes when you just hear it abstractly, 13 billion sounds like it's larger than 7 trillion. Which of all of these numbers, which outrages you the most and which should outrage the public the most?
I think that we can all agree the trillions of dollars that were extended by the Federal Reserve to the banks in the form of corporate welfare. What they did is they took our money, the U.S. dollar, the fact that they control the currency, the fact that they have control of the money supply, and for the first time in history, and I'm talking about in the 100-year history of the Federal Reserve, they played favorites. They said, we'll give $100 trillion to this institution, $100 billion to this institution, another $100 billion to this institution, and so on down the line, when you and I couldn't even come close to accessing that kind of money on those terms. They lent out this money at 0.01% interest. 0.01% interest. Go try to get a loan like that from your bank. It was corporate welfare, pure and simple, and what they were doing is they were playing around with the value of the money in your pocket and the money in my pocket. They were taking the U.S. dollar and playing Russian roulette with it, giving it out in enormous, staggering sums in the hope that they might get it back. Well, they did get most of it back, but what about next time?
In this time when anytime grandma gets a Social Security check, some liberal or Democrat is accused of favoring socialism. This strikes me as kind of not just a corporate socialism, but as you suggest, a corporate socialism that picked out individual favorites among those who were going to get the money redistributed to them. Is that a fair analogy?
That's absolutely true, and what the GAO audit shows is that the Fed cannot explain why they chose one institution over another institution. All that anybody had to do was make noises about liquidity or stress, and somehow that would justify the transfer of billions of dollars of what amounts to your money and my money. You know, again, to give you a sense of what this is like, $16 trillion, $10 trillion, that's much more than the U.S. entire federal budget for the course of a year. In fact, that's more than all of the goods and services that we produce in the United States in the course of a year. So the Fed was handing out to these select favorite institutions more money than it takes you and I to produce, and everyone in America, all 300 million of us, to produce in the course of an entire year, without any authorization. This is not voted on by Congress. This is just handouts from the Fed.
So there is no such thing as monopoly in our Islamic market. There is no such thing as a cartel. You cannot fix prices. You cannot control the market as producers, which is what OPEC has done. This is not Islam. No. Has any scholar, Salafi or Sufi, denounced OPEC for violating Allah's law and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ? I'm not aware of it. And so now you have a controlled market. And forget it. The price of oil is no longer determined by the free and fair market. Forget that. The price of oil is now manipulated by those who control the market. And what they did with oil, they did with cocoa, they did with coffee, they did with sugar, they did with rice, they did with all commodities. They manipulate the market and they fix the price. It's no longer a free and a fair market anywhere in the world. It's a Zionist market of thieves. Is this what the Jewish religion gave you to the world? Not at all. You have corrupted the Jewish religion and you're destroying the Jewish religion. Now comes the interesting part of the subject. The price of oil has been going in only one direction since then. Have you noticed? It was $6, $7, $8 a barrel, and then it went to 12, and then it went to 15, then it went to 20, then it went to 30, then it went to 40, then it went to 60, then it went to 80, and 90, and 100. It's more than 100 now. And all the time Imran thought it's a US dollar collapsing, because I was only focusing on this part of the subject. And as the US dollar collapsed, went down in value, all the rest of the money in the world is going down in the value. If you think your Malaysian money has the same value that it had 5 years ago, you're dreaming. 5 years ago you were richer, with the same ringgit in your pocket. And your ringgit has been falling and you don't even know it. So I was focusing on that part of the subject, not on this part. That's my mistake. The price of oil is going up and up and up and up and up, and that is not by accident. That's a part of the plan. That's why the Prophet said, believers must not touch that gold. From the time oil is sold for US dollars, the oil is now functioning as money. Where gold was functioning as money to back the paper, now oil is backing the paper. So number one, the US dollar is now given an opportunity to fly higher than it has ever flown before. Even while the value in terms of gold is going down, the United States is becoming more and more wealthy. It doesn't have to bother about any amount of gold in Fort Knox anymore. In order to make money, all you need is three things. You need a printing press, you need paper, and you need ink. And you can print and make as much money as you want.